welcome to the Phraktion webinar series. We are recording, I'm sure you heard the message as you came in. So hopefully that's okay with everybody, and we can move on to the next slide. Johannes. So just a reminder, Phraktion has a very bold ambition of beginning to change how pharma works. We're achieving that by very rapidly growing a trusted community of biopharma functional experts. We've come a long way in just over a year. I think we're around about 375 partners globally right now, and looking to hit 400 very soon, no doubt. So thank you for everybody for your efforts around that. And in doing so, we're very well connected together to deliver projects and solve any problem, either individually or as teams. And in doing so, really begin to shape the way biopharma industry works and really take out a lot of the inefficiencies that no doubt many of us seen in our long careers. So next slide, Johannes, that's okay. So the important bit, of course, for today, a very warm welcome to Dr. Johannes Mühl. Will be taking us into the very interesting area of artificial intelligence with the title Megatrend AI Use Cases in Healthcare. I'll let Johannes speak in much more detail around that. But just to say something as introduction to Johannes. Johannes is a fellow partner at Phraktion. Having got to know Johannes a little bit, I know his true passion, if you like, beyond AI, is in cycling. But what's very clear in discussing cycling with Johannes is how he really brings the technology and the science to what he does, even as a pastime. So I think a lot of logical and critical thinking about what he does in his pastime with cycling, and almost a championship cyclist, I would describe you as, I think, Johannes. But when you're not doing that, Johannes, I believe you have got an illustrious career in the biopharma industry, working as both Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer, with deep knowledge in scaling pharma, biotech, and medtech companies. You've consulted with Exopharm, CUTISS, Baxiva, Smart Reporting, and many other companies. Before that, of course, you had a long career in UBS, Zimmer Biomet, Pfizer, Mepha, Teva, and Myriad Genetics. So with that, Johannes, I'm sure you can do a much better introduction yourself, but I just wanted to say a few words. So over to you, Johannes, to take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nigel, for the kind introduction. I couldn't do it any better because I'm a bit complex to capture, but I have a corporate career in Pfizer. I've worked for Myriad Genetics, which is one of the first companies which ever commercialized the gene diagnostics tests successfully and worldwide. So, you know, it's quite of an interesting company in a way. So I have a diagnostics background, a medtech background, and a pharma background, and I've been all over the place. I've covered basically every position in finance you can cover, but I've gone far beyond, you know, so it's not just finance I'm doing. I'm mainly working as a business partner on various projects. And I have recently been quite a lot involved with AI. And AI is it's a beast to capture, right? One is really, it has a lot of downsides and has a lot of upsides. And I think what I'm trying to do is I try to find practical use cases in life science which really have value, but I also want to illustrate the risks and the dangers of using AI and the complexity we have. And because I come from the diagnostics industry primarily, you know, AI has a huge part in it, because it's just very easy because we got data, right? And as soon as you have data, AI becomes kind of relevant. So I will go to the next slide. So this is just about data privacy. There's none. This is just we have no data privacy today, right? It's all going to be on YouTube, just to be aware of that. And so if you're not liking data privacy, you have to knock off. The agenda, it's just I just moved this to the so you can see this better. So the agenda is just I kind of quickly give an introduction of what AI is, what big data is, what advanced analytics is, what machine learning is, what deep learning is, what generative AI is, what large language models are, and the learning types. It really has to be in a nutshell, because otherwise we're going to spend hours on it. Then, you know, we do use cases of AI in healthcare. That's the primary focus of this presentation, just to really look at where can they be applied and why pharma, in my view, is far behind medtech. Okay, there's a number of reasons for it. And then we go through the ethics and limitations and risks. I'm somebody who's extremely risk averse. That's probably my German heritage to some extent, but I'm also Australian. So, I want to talk about practical use cases. It's not just the risks and issues. I really want to say where it can be used and where it shouldn't, or where we have to consider first other aspects. And then we can talk about the future of AI, and then we go straight into Q&A. So about advanced analytics. This is a very old chart. It's almost, it's more than 200 years old now. It's from Minard. Minard used to be a French mathematician. And here he plotted basically, probably some of you probably know this chart. It shows basically 6 data types in a table, right? This shows the march of Napoleon against Moscow and his retreat, right? It shows the troop size, it shows the temperature, it shows the different villages and so forth. There's 6 data types in there. What I'm trying to say here is that advanced analytics are not new. Okay, it's really, really old. And then big data. What's big data? It's just a lot of data, easily accessible. It requires efficient computing power. But what's really big about big data is that it kind of builds the hypothesis for you. In the past, you kind of saw an association somewhere and you started to build a hypothesis around it. Now you have all the data and you can just use AI or whatever, just common sense to see associations here by clustering, right? So the big difference with big data today is you just get the hypothesis presented to you. Hypothesis means association. It doesn't necessarily mean causality. Okay, we'll get to that a bit later. What are the learning types in AI? So first of all, there's unsupervised learning. One is the clustering, the associations, the correlations. It simply looks at, let's say, weight and height, and it, like kind of captures the cluster. And this is kind of, the unsupervised approach. And then you got supervised approaches, the linear logistical regression. I don't want to bore you too much with this, but it's basically some kind, you need, in order to do this, to do supervised kind of regression, it basically requires a bit of an idea of the in and the output. You cannot just do this wildly. You need to have a bit of an idea. And what generative, so there's a new kind of learning type. It's basically building all these different learning types. Those are basic statistics on top of each other. So for example, generative adversarial networks would be something you have generative AI to collect information, and then you have certain attention layers which kind of challenge your data and funnel it in a certain way. So you basically start to build a decision pathway. And this is kind of the latest one. And then, when you look in the history of AI, you can see that, in chess, basically, in 1997, Garry Kasparov basically lost against Deep Blue. Why did it take so long to do the same with Go? It took AlphaGo. It took like many, many years until in 2016 that Lee Sol was defeated by AlphaGo. He actually won the first game of this competition. The reason for it is, one is optionality, right? The more optionality you have, the harder it is for AI to defeat. And this was not AI. This was the chess was just pure computing power, and Go basically used the Monte Carlo tree search function to basically defeat that Lee Sol player. But what you can see is the field is a lot bigger, and you got a lot more functionality, a lot more optionality on that field. So this was the reason why it took so long. So when you look at AI, where it's really useful is usually when the rule sets are very clear. But as soon as you change the creativity, like as soon as you have a playing level field, which is the rules are constantly changing, then AI is basically lost. I mean, not lost, but it's not going to be as successful as it is when you have a very limited optionality and you have the rule set is not that clear. Now, what are the game changers in healthcare? Like to get basically a bit more into the use cases. So one thing, me as a finance person, is I'm looking into, where it's being used, very top down. This is a screenshot I took from Amazon. So I was at one of the AWS events, and this is a screenshot which captures and basically superseded my old slides. So I took that one here, and you can see that you have a lot of companies now established in imaging and diagnostics. I personally supported a project in smart reporting. They're concentrated on a decision-making tree for radiologists. So they have a dictation device, and they speak into that dictation device, and then it basically does all the reporting and helps them on a decision tree basis. It then later on takes the CT scans and as well it analyzes them for small little neoplasms and cardiological problems. Some in Heidelberg, for example, there was a recent case where they discovered cancer behind the heart because of this. So they are in imaging and diagnostics. It's very clear because this clustering approach and this visual recognition, I think it's very, very powerful. And then you got, the predictive analytics and risk scoring. So Tempus, a very good friend of mine, I'm currently working for building up a lab in Australia for contract sequencing and cancer early detection. He's coming from Tempus. And there's also an optionality for AI, but it's a data driven, and we lack the data at the moment. So contract sequencing data here is not that established yet. The same is true for genomics. It's there, but it's not there, right? We still lack the data. And then what's really big is hospital decision support. We have, but it's mainly combined with imaging and diagnostics, plus also like what's it called? Company called Epic, for example, where you have the whole health record of all the patients. There's no data secrecy anymore, actually, where this is just simply helping the efficiency up to the invoicing, automatic invoicing, right? So upstream, downstream. And then you got remote monitoring. I find it's quite strong. We'll get to this a bit later. And then you got virtual assistants. I don't really believe in virtual assistants, even though there was a recent study. I heard that virtual assistants are actually more empathetic compared to the real person. So there has been an interesting investigation. So, but I personally hate it, but maybe there is a case for it in the future. You got clinical trials. We'll get to that as well very soon, and nutrition, mental health, and compliance. What's missing in this chart, in my view, is a bit more emphasis towards medtech, medical devices, and so forth. I find this not clear. And also for me, for example, animal testing is part of the clinical trial here, but I think it's very interesting concept. At least medical devices should have another part here, as well as robotics. So I found this missing here on this chart. So that's my critical thinking about Nigel's point, that I'm a little bit of a critical thinker here or there. So for me as a finance guy, I always look at, is AI actually currently valued correctly? This is a chart where, we looked at the compute cycle, like PC, internet, mobile, and cloud, and every time it was underestimated. The average underestimation of the valuation of that breakthrough, technological breakthrough, was 38%. The question is really, is AI going to follow Moore's law? And if yes, how would this look like? Or are we overestimating at the moment? I don't have the answer. I don't have a crystal ball, but it looks like we might not yet completely comprehend what it is. And it could be underestimated. Even so, when you look at NVIDIA and the valuation you see there going on, one could argue it's a bubble, right? It's an AI bubble. Hard to tell. On the other side, when you look at the Moore's law, you can also say that in drug development, we currently have the opposite, right? It's a reversed law. So it's more inverted. Where is it currently used? This is just a top-down slide. I got this from Bain. It's been, I think the data was sourced in September 2023. So last year, it's just a few months old. And you can really see the actual use cases in pharma at the moment. Of course, what's very interesting here, you see, the dark red here means it's fully rolled out. What you can see is that it's like the more further away you're from the patient, the more it basically is established already. The reason is probably related to regulatory and safety, but it's amazing when you look at this trajectory. It's just, one can argue it's just a matter of time until you are getting there. What's very important, for big companies is that at least 40% of the executives say that they have baked in savings due to AI. These can be indirect savings. So indirect savings from a perspective that, you get AI packages just from other providers, and all of a sudden your organization just becomes more efficient because you got ChatGPT or other kind of, systems established. So they help you automatically, indirectly, without you having to do anything, simply because you got your existing programs. But there's also active attempts to really optimize, for example, drug development, and we'll get to that a bit later. So here, I just would like to talk about the classical clinical trial pathway. I mean, we all know it takes 10 years, about $2 billion USD are being spent on developing a drug. When you look at what AI could potentially do. So the main issue is we have a lack of data. Without data, you really struggle, right? So one part is where AI can help is simply train the model. You can also, you can do lots of iterations with AI. You can just let it compute. It's different to when you have the current classical approaches, so it's just much better. Apparently, you can synthesize a molecule within 46 days, and you can test it as in many assays in lots of like, different aspects, metabolic, microsomal, stability, blah, blah, blah. What I find very interesting is the prediction of outcome of animal models in phase 2 and 3 and phase 2 and 3. So animal testing, sometimes you don't have to do animal testing when you use AI in some cases. For example, when you look in an allergic reaction, nowadays there's an issue with animal models when you talk about, exposing them to an allergen. It doesn't work all the time because animals are fundamentally different. So sometimes, it's just enough to take a human cell culture, do visual recognition. How is it reacting once it's exposed in a petri dish to that allergen, and then use AI to analyze it. So, there are other ways. There's another approach I've seen recently where no animal testing was done. This was for an insulin pump from Abbott, I think, where they simply had they had all the data basically, and they were able to do the whole model without an animal, and it worked as well. So there are several aspects where an animal model is not needed. I know Charles River, for example, is working quite strongly on trying to overcome not to use animal models everywhere. It will still be used, okay? It's just depending on the specific case, where you can say, okay, we don't need it. And it's actually cheaper, right? And potentially better. The next thing, where when you look into the next pathway, like preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So one part is, you can improve your patient recruitment simply because you have more data about your patients. You can limit, you can design your trial better. And I find what's also interesting, you can track your patients down the road. So for example, when you look at Parkinson, Parkinson has, when you, let's say, expose a patient to an intervention, and then you track them down the road, sometimes, the symptoms of Parkinson are very erratic. They happen in 3 weeks, they have something, and then nothing for 2 weeks, and then have it again. And so when you check in with their doctor and they get surveyed or they get interviewed, what happened? Nothing happened. Everything is okay. It's completely like very difficult to track them. But those digital biomarkers, there's a potential that you can track them, all of a sudden their heart rate went up or down. There's another way of basically looking into the data and being more specific, and then question the patient also. Hey, what happened 2 weeks ago? All of a sudden you didn't walk anymore or something happened, so it's kind of an additional path where this can help. But you can see it's a lot more sophisticated to support this hypothesis that AI will help in R&D, in classical drug R&D. It will take a lot of time. But they basically say this whole thing here, coming back to this here, can be done in 46 days. Yeah. Versus us, we take like years and years and years to do that. So and the one thing I just want to mention is there is no prediction possible for phase 1 yet. Yeah. So because of dosage, the one reason we face in AI is the labeling. So for example, we have water. Yeah, water is not toxic. Nobody thinks water is toxic, but it depends on the dose, right? So at some point of time, water is toxic. So this is the reason why phase 1 is not yet, probably it's not going to be so successful, but some other companies, they say they can. So this is a slide I have from Bionomy. This is the NVIDIA company focusing right now on R&D in pharma. So we can see that, they have here a number of AI discovered. This is a real image I've taken from a presentation there. So, they say a number of AI discovered molecules in clinical trials. So they say, it's increasing. So in 2023, it was 67. Then they say in phase 1, we have number of AI discovered molecules in clinical trials in phase 1 already. So there are some already in phase 1, right? So it's getting there, it's coming, but we'll see how successful it is. What I have seen now with the binding post-prediction, which is on another slide of mine, which is not part of this presentation, is that binding post-prediction, where we simply try to like connect something with a protein, it seems to be from the quality perspective equal to what we had traditionally, but much faster. So the efficiency gain is a lot. Just want to kind of now pivot towards Medtech and show how powerful Medtech is compared to what we see in pharma at the moment. And maybe Medtech then actually can moderate or modulate our expectations we have towards pharma. Medtech is a lot more mechanical, right? Medtech is it's just more straightforward, right? This is a very special case. This is Anne. Anne had a stroke. She was a teacher, very successful young lady, was a teacher, and I think she was 36 years old, and she suffered a stroke. She just got married, she had a stroke, and then she got the lock-in syndrome. Lock-in syndrome basically means that She can listen, but she can watch, she can view everything. She's conscious, but she can't express herself. She can't move. She's on a wheelchair. So she is completely paralyzed. She can't do anything, right? She can only listen and can see stuff. So what they did is they basically measure her EEG, her brainwave, the electric communication in her brain. And they basically told her, when you please say yes, right? And they captured when she said yes. So the brain pattern when she said yes was captured, and they simply programmed machine learning to make her give her back her language. So what they did is they she's able to speak. She's able to speak half as fast as a human being now, because the computing power on a simple laptop is not enough to capture this. But we all know this is just a question of time until this is being resolved. Luckily for her, she had a wedding speech she gave, and we could capture her voice and everything, her intonation and everything. So they actually really gave her back her voice. So she speaks like before, and now she's able to express herself beyond. She used to have glasses with a little LED on front where she was able to communicate like with pings and things like that. So, but of course now this is a lot more sophisticated. And there's just a matter of time until that becomes mobile with her. So she can move around with that and she can really communicate again. So this is just like how powerful it is in medtech. The same thing is true for the bionic eye. It's been something developed in Melbourne and Australia, but it is all over the place now where people actually can see again. They can't really see colors, but they can see light and they can see darkness. So it's somebody completely blind, 100% blind, is able to see again, right? So at least they can move in a house, or they know where there's a window, where there's a door. So it's an interesting concept. It's just a matter of time until that's going to improve. The same is true for the arm. And you can see virtual assistants. This is BrainLab, a company I was consulting back in the days. You can see that it's just the imagination of how much you can do with this kind of very mechanistic approaches in AI. It's easy for grasp because you got all the data, right? And then you got the Da Vinci robotics. So I'm not going to go too much into detail. These are just some pictures how powerful machine learning has become. But now I want to really talk about the limitations, risks, and challenges. So one is data quality. And, a bit going into this, I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's garbage in, garbage out if you got no data. And that's the main challenge I see in pharma at the moment. There's data banks, and some of the proteins are being kind of, assessed on how they could look like without knowing how they look like. Then, sometimes you just measure incorrectly, and you really have issues to assess the quality of the data in many cases. And then you got anonymous data. I mean, it's not everything is public, And then you got the full reality versus the useful model, so reduction of complexity, the perpetuating bias, missing human know-how. And, you're basically in the box, you can't think outside of the box, and correlation is not causality. But we also have implementation risks. It's not just the standard risks. It's really like just how to interface of systems. How is that going to work? Common language is missing. And healthcare is highly regulated. Not all interventions will easily be implemented and how to make it equitable. And then there's a black box. Most people just don't understand how AI works. Neither do I in many cases, because I really have to follow the algorithm, and it's not so easy to do. But there's hope. So the green boxes, I think, describe what you can actually improve on. It's not going to go away, but you can improve. So a useful model with all known assumed as blah, blah, blah. A model it will always stay a model, but it will get closer to the reality. Okay. I'm saying the risks remain, but you will move further on. And the box, it's true, the box is the box, but the box will get bigger with more data and more information and so forth. But it will remain a box. It's just going to get bigger. I think what we really can improve upon are the whole implementation part of it. The interoperability, interfaces of systems and processes, also the humans, how they work together. All of these things, they can be fixed, and I think they will. And the regulation of the industry is just a matter of time. Might be a very long time until this can be fixed. And black box, I think what we will need in the future is HCPs who are AI specific, like they're really focused on AI, so that we have not just a financial audit. In my trade, we have financial audits and so forth, but we actually need AI audits, and we need clear ethics, and we need clear Probably in the OR and the whole development, we will probably need controls in place with expertise to look into AI, and probably in a module kind of specific way. So it's, it can be, it's like a building block. It's seen as a building block, and it's a trustworthy building block. We can rely upon, encapsulate it without ability to jump to the next thing. So just to make it safe. Yeah. And, are there any questions? This was like very fast.
Well, thank you, Johannes, for a fascinating insight into AI there. I mean, just the examples in medtech there of being able to, see, speak, and to move really opens the eyes on the possibilities in AI. So thank you for that, Johannes. So really open up to the group with any questions. I know Paul is busy on the chat, so we can maybe go to Paul if there's anybody wants to jump in with the first question.
Thank you, Nigel. Johannes, a really, really good presentation, because AI is clearly the emperor's new clothes in many cases, and actually its proper implementation is vital, because so many people are buying AI blindly, trying to think that it's going to solve problems that it may not be ready to do. A couple of questions. One, you mentioned about the ability to avoid animal models, but sometimes obviously they're part of your data file. Are the regulators now thinking that they'll accept AI replacing classic animal model work when you get to the file?
Yeah, there are some cases where the regulator has approved without animal models. So the two aspects I mentioned, when you talk about, let's say, vaccines about allergies, there's a case, I had mentioned, and this is approved. And then in medical devices, there was a case with Abbott where they had an insulin pump.
Okay, thank you.
These are the only two examples I know.
Yeah, so I suppose we got regulators have got to pick this up as well and accept in cases that this is an acceptable way forward. So I suppose once we get more case examples, it'll happen.
It's up to basically it's up to the specific circumstances. In some cases the animal model just is not useful and everybody knows about it.
I can see Bob's got a question, so let's go to Bob's question before I deluge you with more of mine. Bob, over to you.
Hi, Bob.
Thank you, Johannes. Yes, my question was, well, potentially simple one, which is, in your opinion, where is the biggest impact of AI in terms of patient health? I mean, you mentioned, of course, in R&D, in clinical trials, in perhaps commercial side, but what about on the patient end? Because you mentioned Medtech, digital health. So where in your opinion today with AI as we have it?
Wow.
The biggest impact.
It's a very good question. Very difficult to answer because they're different aspects. One is a health component, and one is a financial component, a commercial component, right? It's really difficult to differentiate. And for the individual patient, it really just depends on the case, on the use case, right? For Anne, who suffers a lock-in syndrome, it's a very rare occasion. I think the incidence of this is like it's like, I don't know, I have to look it up, but it's like 1 in a million or 1 in something like this. For her personally, the AI is very impactful, right? Extremely impactful. For the broader society, because she's such a rare case, probably not so much. It's very difficult now for me to say where AI could really be applied for the broader amount of patients. I think it will start with simple things. Like the best thing we can do is, in my view, is cancer early detection. If we are out there with liquid biopsy and we do this test regularly, at least on the patients who are like, let's say 55, 60 years old, we do this regularly, and we test every patient once a year on a liquid biopsy, with a liquid biopsy. And we track, and it's not so much to do with AI now, it's part of it. But if we are able to track those patients, we could reduce mortality a lot. I mean, that's kind of what I think is the future. But unfortunately, when you look into companies like Grail and the whole diagnostics industry, I'm more from the diagnostics industry because I believe that they have actually the biggest play at the moment, medically speaking, but financially it's not viable because the public payers are not ready to pay for it. The private payers, they don't yet have the data to really come to the conclusion. So it's just a matter of time. But I think the diagnostic space probably the most impactful part.
All right. If the team allow me a follow-on question, because you're from the diagnostics part. I mean, company like Roche, who has both, the pharmaceutical side as well as the diagnostic side. So how far along are they, if you want to talk about an individual company, if you know or not?
Foundation One has a very interesting test. Foundation One belongs to Roche, and Foundation One is very much focused on it. They are far along, but they, just like everybody else in the diagnostics, omics, and so forth space, they lack the data and the acceptance so you got to imagine there's a lot of challenges for them. It's market access driven. It's also reimbursement driven. If you want to, for example, test a patient in many countries, you have in-country testing requirements, which means, for example, in Germany, if you want to get a test reimbursed, you need to have an MVZ. An MVZ is like a spawner from a clinic. Then you need to have a specific reimbursement code, which exists in Germany, but it only goes via an MVZ. In order to have an MVZ, you need to have a hospital in Germany. Then, it's not just like a drug you can just send over the border and let it be supplied by a distributor and then an HCP. It's a lot more complex. And then the lab needs to be, or the instrument you're using needs to be in the country. So it's one of reimbursement, one of basically the in-country testing required. Australia is terrible about that as well. There's a lot of regulations still in place. And then simply, if you want to do a diagnostics panel, you're facing an uphill battle in that your clinical trial design usually involves that you need to have a ton of patients. It's a lot. It's a lot more expensive than to do a pharmacological, a study on an intervention, which is like, let's say, a cancer drug. Because it's not life-threatening immediately, right? It's different. You also have no orphan disease status or something like this, which can accelerate you. So you look at Grail or you look at Exact Sciences for their Cologuard, it's a lot harder to get this over the line. And Foundation One is ahead. It's just on par with the others. They have a specific test, which is a bit different towards, some other things. I think the truth is the only way diagnostics actually right now can make a significant amount of money is with companion diagnostics, where, for example, olaparib from AstraZeneca is already out there. It's reimbursed, right? But you can actually capture certain patients if you can say, they're HRD, homologous recombination deficiency positive. Then you can go with that path, but it's a long part away. And I think Foundation One is not focused so much on CDX, but it's my limited knowledge here.
All right. Thank you, Johannes.
May I ask a question, John?
Sure, Sanjay. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, great talk and very interesting. I'm just interested in one of the slides that you showed earlier, that in your early discovery R&D phase, your timelines have shortened or can shrink quite significantly, like 46 days or something from, say, a few years.
Yeah.
But yet, the later part, what you said is that it's not possible yet, and because of the phase one and the complexities are involved with that. If you look at the overall costs in drug development, most of the costs are in clinical setting. The early settings are probably you're shrinking the timeline, but those costs are not as much. I wonder how much of the AI would have impact, given that you're saying it's probably not yet feasible to have impact in clinical setting in terms of those cost reduction.
So good question, Sanjay. So my comment was the 46 days are needed. So for example, in silico and other companies, they're saying they can synthesize a molecule and test it in many assays and blah, blah, taking 46 days. So all of this here, these 4.5 years, so usually you start somewhere at the university, with some kind of idea, you find a target and so forth, and then you develop it over time. But this is supposed to take a very short time in the future. And that's already happening today. As we can see in this slide here, they already have molecules AI discovered out there. So they are already out there. Yeah, that already happens. And the binding post predictions are very fast. So it's these 46 days are not referring to the phase one. It's really just the early signs before you're actually going to preclin. The one thing where AI, in my view, is not yet able to do anything is the prediction of how successful phase one is going to be. That's because of the labeling of the dosage, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Sanjay. When you asked the question, I was thinking about it. I mean, from my point of view, what this really does is it gives more LOE, and it's going to give higher peak sales. That's going to be the win-win for assets that get all the way to approval. I mean, you're taking almost, 4 years and a couple months off of the discovery process, and your LOE clock starts right away. So, this to me makes a lot of sense. I was curious to see, Johannes, if you were going to talk about it on the commercial side. I just don't know how AI fits in commercially. I struggle to see it.
The commercial side itself, like when you talk about market access, the reimbursement pathway,
Marketing,
medical
activating
writing.
patients. I mean, I think there's probably some AI that may do some, patient counseling or patient interaction and answer some questions, and maybe help you identify some audience. But I really, the question for me is out there with AI on the true marketing benefit.
It comes down to patient tracking and identifying patients who are eligible for that intervention in the end. Like when you talk about the direct commercialization, how successful this could be, it's patient monitoring. So if you have certain patterns, if you can identify certain patterns, you can potentially use those patterns. Just an idea, it's all theory to determine, hey, have a look, talk to your HCP, maybe you have that condition.
Johannes, a couple of years ago when I was launching a product here in the US, I enlisted a vendor who was saying that they could track the patient all the way to the end. And then what it really came down to after I signed the dotted line with them and spent, almost $1 million with them, it was soft at best. And it was really interesting because they could never really tell me. They were tracking the patient and by her search activity and things like that, but it was never really I can say, hey, she came from here, went all the way through the funnel and came out with with prescription in hand.
That mechanics, and that's the problem you face, is you need to be very clear on what you're looking for and be able to make sure that's a scientific, but like it's about cause and consequence. You really need to know at what point of time how do you capture the data? Is it actually feasible to capture the data? Those questions you have to ask yourself, right? Is it possible? I'm a cyclist. Nigel gave that nice description in the end. That's my passion. In cycling, you can measure everything, right? So, I had Sapiens, which measured my insulin, and on a concurrent basis. I knew exactly when do I have to eat something, when I shouldn't eat something. I knew exactly what my blood sugar levels were, my glucose levels were. If you just need to know exactly how to capture that information and bring it across. If you don't have that, you can forget about it, right?
Yeah.
Tim,
that's something you got to think about.
Just a thought, Tim. I think one of the big issues is the provision of data. So if I think about my experience going, for example, in the sales side in the US, because the US has got so much data around the doctor, the ability to get data down to a doctor's prescription, theoretically, AI could direct attention onto the right doctor. If you then transfer that into Europe, where you've got block data and you're only allowed to look at BRIC and also the CRM restraints, maybe AI is less sharp, but I have a feeling it won't be long before. I know that Vaz at Novartis has said that reps are going to be directed by AI as to where they go for the next sales call. And I think AI could probably help a lot. But again, if you haven't got full data, to your point, then you end up with gaps. And then you end up with it directing.
I think you're probably right on that front, in that AI will make companies more efficient. And that I agree with. That to me is definitely what's coming down the road. You look at all the vendors today in the at least some in the US, and I talk to a lot of them. They all are like, hey, we can do Salesforce effectiveness, and you can almost pivot your geo lines on the fly now, if your territory geo lines on the fly with some of these programs.
Be interesting to see how that impacts drug pricing in the future, doesn't it? All of this. So I think it's a real, can I use the word disruptor? Transformative approach that, just looking at this slide here, which we all know about. So
I would love to get a copy of this slide. I think, Sarah, that's a great point. I mean, it gives companies a longer runway to really capture their return, if you will. And so that's a really interesting comment.
Johannes,
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly touch base on Tim's point. You know, one part I think when you talk about tracking of cause and consequence and the patient themselves, I think Epic and Tempus, they are very impactful potentially to capture all the data, because you know what Epic is doing right now is they just capture the whole patient journey. So if you, for example, have a specific drug, I don't know your company and I don't know what exactly you're after, but if Epic captured the data of that patient, they have the whole patient history of that, then you know then you have to look for those attributes which most likely are relevant for you, and then ask Epic and get a contract with Epic to pass these over to you. You know, I don't know exactly how they operate. You would have to look into that, but I guess the more data we have, the more accurate data we have, the more likely you probably can actually commercialize on bank on the data. That's the idea I would have.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And
go ahead. Sorry. No, there used to be a vendor in the UK called Dinlink that did longitudinal data off patients. I don't know whatever happened to it, but it theoretically did follow patients for years. It was massively powerful, but again, the panel size was limited. One other question, Johannes, which came up from a previous webinar, it was Nick, and he said, is AI blind to older data because of the fact that digitization of data has a time limit? So, for example, if he said if there was just drug discovery understanding in 1995, if it only sat in a journal that was never digitized, does AI have a blind spot to that memory?
Yes, it does. I mean, the one is it's cross-referenced sometimes. Like if you go back into literature, you know, it's of course cross-referenced, and there's a certain, let's say you see the golden roof and it's referencing to the foundation, right? Along those lines. Of course, you would have some remnants of references, but yeah, if it's not there, it's not there.
Yeah. Okay,
simple as that.
Yeah. So I remember that actually also, Paul, that Nick Moore gave a previous webinar a couple of months ago or so now for everybody to see on YouTube. But his communication that day, at least when he was speaking about AI, that really you needed to know how you use AI as a tool, and really needed human experience knowledge to sit alongside the AI tool that you're using. So I don't know if you'd agree with that, Johannes. Does the AI, you can't just flick a switch and give you the answer, you really need sort of human interaction around that?
You know, one I really appreciate it. I listened to Nick's presentation, and he is very correct, because in the 90s, you know, we also had a different way of doing research. And I wanted to, I mean, it was more like really down to science and less about publish and perish. You know, nowadays, a lot of things get published just for the sake of publishing, you know, as many things are being done, which I kind of disagree with in a way. You know, I like that approach. So some of the really good science is out there. And yeah, of course, you can't really say that, because one thing is one point of Nick when he looked into this was he said that, you know, data is all equal. Then, you know, there's a very difficult, AI has difficulties to measure the importance of certain aspects of certain findings compared to others, and they have an issue to weight it accordingly. And I think that's a challenge. That's why we need a human intervention here on that part.
Thank you, Johannes. Very clear. Are there any more questions or comments? Everybody, I can't see any hands up. I'm just looking in the chat.
It's Simon here. Maybe I can just ask a quick question. It's in the chat, but I'd be interested to hear what is said. So it's about potential bias in the data training sets. I think there has been some concern about underrepresentation of various populations, such as ethnic minorities and maybe women in some of the training data sets. So how can we avoid bias? And that might be particularly important in diagnostics and in clinical practice.
The AI is not better at avoiding bias compared to humans. Actually, I believe it's worse. It's not it's not possible to do that, you know, unless you have an intervention. I mentioned some of the approaches, you know, how AI is being set up. You basically generate data, and then you have attention layers, and you kind of check with, you know, certain algorithms, you know, how to go for certain things. But that's just nothing else other than a human being told that, hey, you might have unconscious bias, you know, just watch out. Don't be judgmental, you know, don't think in your whatever, you know, in your limited mindset, just think outside. But it's the same. There's no way that AI can be better than human with biases.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
That's my view on it. I mean,
Sure. Perhaps biased view, Johannes. Thank you. So, any other questions, comments? Well, if there's not, then let's draw the session to the close by certainly thanking Johannes for a very thoughtful presentation and discussion. Clearly lots more on this journey around AI, and just at the beginning of this. So maybe you'll come back in a short while and give us an update, Johannes, how you think things are shaping up. But I think that's very clear, very start of a long journey for AI, and perhaps also Phraktion. But again, what's very clear today is the amount of huge expertise and cross-functional thinking around how we can take this forward. So congratulations to everybody, and thank you for joining once again the webinar. So with that, once again, thank you, Johannes, and hopefully share more details of an upcoming webinar very soon, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Excellent questions from everybody. Thank you.
Really good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Brilliant.